You should always think twice before inviting a prophet over for dinner. They're not going to play by any of the polite social rules we have. You know the rules we have. Don't talk politics, don't talk religion, don't criticize your dinner host. That's all a prophet wants to do. The prophet is the one who comes into your house and, they criticize the decor because it's not right, and they're going through your medicine cabinet. They go mess with the temperature in the house without asking, and they change the channel on the television. That's what happens when a prophet shows up to dinner. Another thing that might happen when a prophet shows up to dinner is that they don't wash their hands before they eat. We're going to be in Luke chapter 11 today, and what has led us up to the unit of text we're talking about, Jesus has been talking about letting your light shine, and he's been talking about this to a group of gathered people, as he often does. And as a result of something he said, one of those in the audience, a Pharisee, invites Jesus over for lunch or dinner or some sort of meal gathering. And this is overall okay. I mean, if the Pharisee weren't interested in any respect, he wouldn't have invited Jesus over. And if Jesus thought it was a bad move to go eat at a Pharisee's house, he wouldn't go. So we started off okay. Jesus goes over maybe to discuss the lesson, answer some questions at the Pharisee's home. But we get off to a rocky start. Luke tells us in chapter 11, verse 38, that the Pharisee was surprised when he noticed that Jesus did not first wash before the meal. This is not really about poor hygiene. I know that every child and teenager, and maybe some adults in the audience, would love if they could point to Jesus as the patron saint of not having to wash your hands. But that's not what's happening. There's some ritual washing that the Jews would do. You can find a few references to this in the Old Testament, the Torah, but most of the references to this are in the Talmud, some later rabbinic teachings about some washings that you would do before you eat. No one should be surprised that, yet again, Jesus is not playing by the rules. So far in Luke, he and his disciples have been in trouble for not fasting like they should, for not observing the Sabbath like the rules say, for healing, so working on the Sabbath. That's happened multiple times. In chapter 7, Jesus touches the coffin of a deceased person, which would make him unclean. So all up leading to this, Jesus has not been interested in following some of the rules. And once again, he's not going to follow the rules. Not only that, he's going to open up some criticism for the Pharisee, sort of uninvited. No one asked him for his opinion, but he's going to give it. So after he doesn't wash and gets called out on it, he begins his critique. And he says, starting in verse 39, "Now then, you Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness. You foolish people, did not the one who made the outside make the inside also? But now as for what is inside you, be generous to the poor, and everything will be clean for you." So Jesus, he's like the guest who shows up and gets served the meal and lifts up the bowl and says, this is still a little bit dirty. And he says to the Pharisee, who is worried about ritual cleanliness, he says to him, "You want to really be clean? Don't focus on this. Be generous to the poor instead. That's how you can be clean." Generosity is the thing that cleanses. And then Jesus goes on to give 3 pointed critiques at the Pharisees. They're called woes. It's kind of the opposite of blessings. It's the stuff you don't want to hear, kind of pronouncing curses in some sense on the Pharisees. He has 3 of them. Number 1, woe to you, Pharisees, because you give God 1/10 of your mint, rue, and all other kinds of garden herbs, but you neglect justice and the love of God. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. So this meticulous care for legal details, but a neglect for God's justice and love. Number 2, woe to you, Pharisees, because you love the most important seats in the synagogues and the respectful greetings in the marketplaces. So they covet the attention and their pride of place. Number 3, woe to you because you are like unmarked graves, which people walk over without knowing it. And in their teachings, if you walk over a grave, you become unclean. So these 3 stinging critiques. You tithe, but you neglect justice. You want the best seats and significant greetings. And you don't know it, but you are contaminating the nation's life. So not only are they not doing the good they ought to do, they're actually a net negative on society. Not a great dinner conversation. You're hurting your culture. You're hurting your society. Well, Jesus has been saying this. Obviously, he's not just saying it to a Pharisee. There are other people there. So a teacher of the law hears it. And the lawyer says, "Teacher, when you say these things," like to the Pharisees, "you insult us also." Now, here's the thing. Jesus is fully divine and fully human. And in this moment, I think his full humanity shows up. Because like any human, Jesus hears, hey, you're making the lawyers feel bad. And he's not going to go, "Oh, I wouldn't want to do that." I know a lot of you are lawyers. I've heard my best lawyer jokes from you. You get it. And so Jesus not only doesn't back off, but he doubles down. He says, oh yeah, you know, I haven't been paying attention to you. You ain't seen nothing yet. Let me turn my attention on you, lawyers. And he says, I got some woes for you. Number 1, you experts in the law, woe to you, because you load people down with burdens they can hardly carry, and you yourselves will not lift one finger to help them. Number 2, you build tombs for the prophets, but it was your ancestors who killed them. So you testify that you approve of what your ancestors did. They killed the prophets, and you build their tombs. And number 3, woe to you, experts in the law, because you've taken away the key to knowledge. You yourselves have not entered, and you've hindered those who were entering. So the way he comes after the teachers of the law is to say that you're loading people down with heavy burdens, but you're not helping them carry those burdens. And you're building tombs for the prophets that your ancestors killed. And you've taken away the key to knowledge, and you're not letting others enter. So basically, they're the person. It's not like they went through the door and locked it for others so they couldn't get in. They went and locked the door from the outside, threw away the key, didn't go in, and aren't letting others in. They're making life hard for people, those who are supposed to be the guardians of knowledge. So Jesus here is exploring this tension between what I want to call holiness, which is following the ritual laws, and justice, in this sense, care for the poor. And I think these two sides of the coin explain a lot of tension that we feel in our own lives. So on one side, you have the holiness trajectory. This is maybe a verse like in Leviticus 19, where God says, "Be holy, because I, the Lord your God, am holy." And the holiness trajectory is about holy bread and holy sacrifices and holy fabric and holy practices. Do all these things to be set apart. That's one trajectory. The other trajectory is the justice trajectory. This is verses like in Deuteronomy where the Israelites are told, when you harvest your grapes, don't go over them a second time. Leave some for the poor and the fatherless and the widow. That's the justice trajectory. Both of these are important. Notice that when Jesus is talking to them, he says to them, you should have done the latter, justice, without neglecting the former. Jesus is not saying give up one for the other. He's saying you have focused only on one. You need to bring the other into the picture. And what I find that some of our religious divides, some of our political divides break down between people who want to prioritize one over the other. And I know it's not quite that simple in political life. I know it's blurry. I know, for instance, and let's just be real about how we talk. I know that the people who really focus on holiness would say to the justice people, oh yeah, you like justice, but only for a few groups. There's some other groups you conveniently leave out. And you love justice when you take it out of my pocketbook. And the justice people would look over and say, well, you talk about holiness, but I don't know, these past several years, you sure have given up a lot of holiness principles to get what you want. Can we just be honest and say that's how the conversation has gone? And I get it, like those critiques are true, which is maybe why we shouldn't define our religious practices by a political party only. There's some inconsistencies there. But that's how those things tend to break down. And both of those things are important. Neither group gets to silence the other group in Scripture because these two trajectories are all through the Bible. And when the holiness people try to silence the justice people, you get things like MLK's letter from a Birmingham jail where he criticizes the moderates for saying, you know, we like where you're headed. We just don't like how you're getting there. Would you please follow the rules and be nice? And when the justice people try to silence the holiness people, you get some wonderful charitable things, but they're not at all attached to God. Neither group gets to shut the other one up. And this is not just about some mushy 50-50 centrism. This is not about compromise. Say, well, we'll do partly holiness and partly justice. This is about saying to followers of Jesus, no matter how you vote and no matter who our leaders are or will be, we are called to be fully about personal holiness and fully about justice. That's not centrism. That's not both sidesism. That is what it means to be a disciple of Jesus first. Disciples of Jesus practice justice and holiness. Both of those are important. We do the latter without neglecting the former. We go at them 100%. This Thursday, I had the honor of giving the invocation for a ceremony honoring our very own Cooter Hale. I said this on Facebook a few days ago. Scripture says that elders should have a good reputation with outsiders. And we have several current and former elders who have that. And I know winning an award is one way to show that. There are other ways. But we have elders who've been Citizen of the Year. We have former elders who are being inducted into the Texas Business Hall of Fame. We have elders who are recognized within their own organizations in ways we might not be aware of. It's a big deal, and I'm thankful for that. But Thursday, I'm at the Arts District Mansion with the Dallas Bar Foundation, many guests, as they give Cooter the Justinian Award, which is a big deal. And I'm listening to people talk about Cooter and how he conducted himself as a judge. I'm listening to Cooter himself tell stories about the courtroom and the tension that they felt in bankruptcy court about holiness and justice. Because holiness might say, you did this much wrong, you owe this much money, this is what you have to pay. And justice would say, well, are we going to ruin a person or a small organization? They've walked into this courtroom, their head bowed down low. They've made a mistake or they've run into some bad luck, and they're wondering what's next for them. And they're wondering if this courtroom is going to load them down with heavy burdens that they can't carry. And I heard Cooter tell a story of some of his, I think, students who went on to represent a small rural hospital who was in bankruptcy court, couldn't pay their bills, and how they kept that hospital alive so that it could continue to serve patients in that community. I heard that day how people worked through the principles of holiness and justice. What a blessing it would be if we all gave that much attention all the time to being fully about holiness and fully about justice. No matter all the noise out there and what we hear, we are fully about both things. So I want to leave you with some Beatitudes. So New Testament scholar Alan Culpepper read these woes, and he said, well, how could we reimagine some of these as blessings? What would be some positive trajectories? Here's the woe, here's their critique. What would it look like to flip it? So I want to read you a few of his, and then close with a few that I've put together based on this passage. Culpepper writes these two Beatitudes. Blessed are you, Pharisees, for you practice justice and love while you pay a tithe of even your smallest source of income. And blessed are you, lawyers, for you ease the burden of others and help them carry their loads. Here's a few more for us, especially these next 2 weeks, but even beyond. Blessed are you, church, for you reject the need for public praise and social media accolades, choosing instead to spend your time mentoring the young, feeding the hungry, and standing alongside those on the margins. Blessed are you, church, for you no longer burden people with endless theological loopholes and purity tests, but you work tirelessly to create welcoming spaces where the doubters and the hurting and the excluded can find a home in the church. Blessed are you, sisters and brothers, for you don't hide behind respectable charity while ignoring the deeper calls for justice and the protection of the vulnerable in your community. And blessed are you, brothers and sisters, for you do not let your commitment to holiness and justice be defined by a single political party or candidate, but you are all in on discipleship, no matter what.